in the room introducing you, I want you to blurt out your vehicle you drove, make, model, with the most miles on it in your years driving a car. So for me, it's a 87 Volkswagen Jetta, 396,363 miles. I'm hoping my CRV passes that, but that was my car I drove with the most miles. Mike Height, going to you now.
Not anywhere close. I was Volkswagen Jetta, somewhere in the 180, 190 range.
All right, Mike Carl.
Well, it's the car I'm in now, which I can't remember exactly the model. I think it's 208, 210 or something, but it's just a little under 300,000 miles.
Yeah, what car is it?
Cadillac.
Okay,
yeah.
Very good.
A Toyota Tundra. We sold it about 215, 220 miles. Stupid mistake. Could have been going for another 400 miles.
Yeah.
Beautiful car. We sold it
215,000 miles. Larry Schultz.
98 Tacoma that I bought with over 100,000 miles on it and drove it to its current 268. It's now had a bit of a frame rust problem, been welded, and now it has a valve problem, so it's become a farm use truck. I'm still putting miles on it, just not very many. So, yeah.
All right.
I have another 98 Tacoma that took its place. So,
lovingly so.
Yeah.
Mr. Ferretti?
I had a 1985 Honda Accord hatchback.
Sweet.
That I got up to 175,000.
All right. Well, everybody got six figures at least. That's cool.
You know what this tells, though, at least my generation, which is a couple of mine, Mike Carl's generation, if a car hit 100,000 miles, that was a limit. Yeah. And that was, once it reached 100,000 miles, by definition, you would sell it and buy something else. Now these cars have just really been broken in at 100,000 miles.
I think the only exception that I can think of back in the 60s, 70s, or whatever, with the Volkswagen Bugs, which seemed, you heard stories of them going 500,000 to 1,000,000 miles.
Yeah. Running forever.
Yeah.
The thing in those days, and everybody I knew pretty much growing up drove some form of a GM car, and the odometers would tap out at 99, 999, and 9/10.
Yeah.
So when you roll an odometer, the big thing, it happened so rarely, was that you'd pull over and take a picture of it.
Yeah.
That was because it just didn't happen that often, right? Now it's quite routine.
Yeah.
All right, that is the Friday Five, the Badger, Michael Heights. Welcome back, sir.
Good morning. Good to be here.
Longest tenured member of our crew, Mr. Michael Carl.
Good morning.
He is the Admiral Bill Stubblefield.
Good morning, Rob.
Attorney at law, Lawrence Schultz.
good morning. Glad to be here.
And with issue number one, Joseph Joey Torts Ferretti. Joe.
Thank you, Rob. Rob, I think you'll agree with me that in all the years that you've been doing radio, and I've got almost 30 years now myself doing local radio, not once has any owner of a station, including the current owner of the station we work for, Mike Hornby, ever come in and said, hey, there's a sacred cow, I don't want you to talk about this issue, or here's how I want you to address it. We've always been allowed to have open debate and opinions regarding matters, even if it concerned the owner of the station himself, which my subject this morning does.
I was wondering why this setup was as such.
Oh, you could see that coming along.
I wanted to put that out there first. Look, Mike Hornby was instrumental in getting 2755 passed out of the House, which was the education bill granting the legislature oversight over West Virginia public schools. And to his credit, Mike set it up so that he knows this is going to the West Virginia Supreme Court, which is what the intent of the bill was, I'm sure, because they want clarification on the scope and breadth of the legislature's conduct when it comes to the public school system in West Virginia. And I think just real quick, a little history lesson is in order. This attempt by the legislature was tried before 1988. A very similar law was passed where a legislative oversight committee would review policies and procedures coming out of the State Board of Education and have to approve or turn them down before they became a state regulation for the public schools in West Virginia. That case went to the West Virginia Supreme Court in 1988. It was styled West Virginia, the legislature, and it was styled the Department of Education versus Ken Heckler, who was the Secretary of State at the time. What had happened there was the Department of Ed had come up with bus designs that were necessary for the school buses in West Virginia. And these were safety regulations and requirements for school buses. Ken Heckler was asked to codify that in the state regulations. He refused to do so because a new law had been passed granting the legislature oversight. So the case went to the Supreme Court, and in an opinion from Justice Thomas McHugh, the State Board of Education won, with McHugh declaring that the Constitution is clear in West Virginia, that a Department of Education is established by Constitution, and thus they have the oversight and regulation and control of West Virginia public schools, not the legislature. Nowhere in the Constitution did it grant the legislature that power. So that's been the law since 1988, and now it's been teed up again by our legislature with House Bill 2755. They have instituted a new oversight scheme in the legislature, and now they're asking the State Board of Ed to run by all their policies and everything that they devise and come up with in terms of governing our schools. They want the legislature to review that. And that's the case that's going to be teed up here, and the Supreme Court's going to be handling that very shortly, because just this week, the State Department of Ed indicated that they are filing suit over the actions of the legislature. So here we are. Now, what we have here, though, is a little bit of a different feeling to this situation with the legislature, in that it was 2 years ago that a little over 2 years ago, that the citizens of West Virginia voted on this very issue, whether to amend the Constitution to grant the legislature this kind of oversight. In a vote of 58 to 42, the citizens of West Virginia rejected that idea. And the Supreme Court, I'm sure, will take note of the fact that this was put to a statewide referendum vote just in 2022. So that's going to be an underlying tension in all this, not only the constitutional analysis, but the fact that we had a vote on it not long ago. So projecting ahead, the question this morning is, do we feel that the citizens have voted on this and it should be a settled issue, or does the legislature have a point that the performance of the schools to this point in time has been so poor that something has to be done and perhaps legislative oversight is necessary? That's my question.
All right, good question, Joe. Good lead off. I'm going to go to Bill Stubblefield first on this, because nobody here in the room has sat with me and done more interviews on education in the state than Bill.
Yeah. First, Rob, let me kind of pick up on what Joe started this, and I'm going to single out Mike Hornby. Mike and I have had a lot of discussion both on air and off air.
Some very passionate.
And I applaud Mike's enthusiasm and his concern. He devotes a lot of his time on educational issues, and he's trying to do the right thing. So I applaud Mike and all of his efforts on this. I'm not sure, though, this is the correct approach of trying to get some oversight. The State Board of Education has made a couple of points on this. One, they say that when you implement a new policy, it takes 4 or 5 years for it to actually take root and to germinate. One of the difficulties we see with our legislators is that they're impatient, that they implement something, and if in this day and time, frequently it has a partisan overtone to it. And with a shift of the legislative body, there's nothing to say that there has to be a continuity, a consistency. And the State Board of Education is arguing that there needs to be consistency. The other thing they're saying is that the bulk of the folks have a lot of experience in education. They know what has worked and what has not worked, whereas a lot of legislators have very little experience other than when they graduated or when they had a child in school. So So I go and making full circle. I agree with Mike Hornby. I agree with the other legislators. Something needs to be done. I also question whether this is the more radical approach we take is the way, or is there some compromise that you can get more involvement without literally reviewing every policy that comes out of the State Board of Education. That's going to be very, very difficult to get anything through. So you may very well result in a quagmire. But I'm not addressing the legality of it. I think the legalities are going to be very interesting, and the points that Joe Ferretti made.
Delegate Michael Haidt voted on this bill. Sir, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I have several thoughts about this. One, a lot of people talk about when this was decided by the people a few years ago, that there were 4 amendments on the ballot, and that some, if you had taken, I think any one of them by itself, you may have had a different result. You had the governor coming out and pushing against the personal property tax issue, and I think that may have affected a lot of the others. Any one of those by itself, I think, may have had a different result. You also had teachers unions and people coming out against this. Department of Education obviously coming out against this and pushing what I think was a false narrative, trying to get a no vote for it. And the false narrative, I would say, is that the legislature wanted to get involved in curriculum and determining what curriculum was going to be taught to kids. And I don't think that was part of it. I think the legislature wants oversight of a department just like they have oversight of every other department in the state, with the exception of education. And the legislature looks at it as we are 50th, normally 49th or 50th in the nation in education, in a nation that has fallen to in the 30s or 40s in the civilized world. And to the legislature, that is just not acceptable. And I think the people of West Virginia are fed up with that as well, and they want something done. I don't know what it is they expect the legislature to do if we can't have some oversight. So if you look at Delegate Hornby in particular, I think if you will look district by district, his district voted for this amendment. So he can look at it and say, the people that I represent want this in law. That's why I brought it up again. That's what my people want, and that's why I drove this forward. I think there were some mistakes made in the past, and we need to correct those, and we're going to let the Supreme Court make the ultimate decision of what is constitutional and what isn't constitutional. And I think if you look at the Constitution, and I don't know the phrase verbatim, but it mentions in there that the State Board of Education makes policy per the legislation. So they are there per the legislation or the law of the legislation. So that could be interpreted, and I think that's what we're going to find out in this law, whether or not the legislation has this authority or not. And I think this is good. I'm glad he brought it forth.
Larry Schultz.
Yes, I'm not deeply familiar with all the nuances of either the legal case or the shared powers, but let me say this. There are any number of things, as Mike Haidt was just telling us, that the legislature has absolutely no competition for the way they run. The highways, infrastructure, a whole bunch of different things. And I don't know where we rank on highways, but I'm guessing we're not in a fight for the top 3 among the 50 states. And so I'm not sure that once we go through this again, that we're necessarily, if the legislature wins in the Supreme Court, going to have actually improved education. I don't mean that as a criticism of the individual legislators. There are structural problems in this state that are going to drive our education outcomes down on a regular basis until we change those structural problems. And so I don't think that the people running the State Board of Education can necessarily be blamed for our ranking. I believe that it is a situation where the economic structure and the opioid crisis and a number of other things. I've always wondered, by the way, we got a whole bunch of money from the opioid industry a few years ago, and I'm still trying to figure out what we did with that money in order to improve education, because the opioid crisis and our education ranking are definitely tied one to the other. And so I'm not necessarily confident, whichever way this claim goes, that the West Virginia ranking on education is going to improve. I'm not saying it's a meaningless thing, and I would suspect that the evidence is pretty good for the Department of Education before the state Supreme Court in terms of what has happened in the past and what the voters think about this statewide. But I also think that it could be much ado about the wrong issue, because we have structural problems that aren't going to get fixed by changing who makes the decisions regarding curriculum and staffing, et cetera.
Mr. Carl.
Well, first of all, I totally agree with everything Mike Height said about this issue, and I'm a lifelong West Virginian, and the oldest one here. Not the oldest person here, but the oldest West Virginian here, and I went through.
I think that was a shot, Bill.
I went through across the brow.
I went through public schools, throughout this whole, and it's always been apparent to me that the unique setup of the legal status of our education system and the state board and so forth has been manipulated by the teachers unions to their favor, and that is a huge obstacle to improved and excellence in education, public education in our state.
So in your opinion, oversight by the legislature is a good thing?
Yes. And back to the example or the issue that was raised, I think our highway system is comparable and competitive with other states, but our education system, because of this unique legal status and management oversight, is not.
Joe Ferretti, it comes back to you.
Well, and that's, I think, one of the compelling arguments the legislature is going to have in this fight is that the track record with the current management of our schools is not good. Now they'll get into the nuances of that, I'm sure, before the court. The other argument that the legislature is going to make is, look, the legislature is under a mandate itself to provide a thorough and efficient system of free public schools, and the legislature is going to argue you can't have that mandate constitutionally and not allow us to at least administer those schools to some degree. So I'm sure that's what they're going to come forth with their arguments. Now, Michelle Blatt just gave an interview about the State Department of Ed's vote to bring this lawsuit. And she said, look, the problem is, and this was actually cited by Justice McHugh in his opinion, striking down a similar state law in 1988. She said, look, we as a Department of Ed, we have programs in place to try to improve education and move the schools forward. Some of these plans are implemented over 3, 4, 5 years. How is a 60-day legislature, which has a lot of turnover from one election to another, how are they going to speak with a unified voice and have a forward-thinking process that encompasses many years into the future? When that's the planning that the Department of Ed is instituting when they get together and decide what's best for our schools. And then that's going to be the counter-argument, and that was also addressed by Justice McHugh in 1988, that you can't have a 60-day legislature governing a 9-month school system. It's not workable. So there might have to be some compromise here in terms of what issues the legislature could actually get involved in if there's going to be any inclination on the Supreme Court's part to grant the legislature some